Welcome to Day 1, Session 3 of the USBI and NRCS Code 336 Soil Carbon Amendment Webinar Series. Next up, we have Conservation Planning Assistance with Matt Flint. Multi-step decision-making process, identification of conservation concerns and problems, adoption of conservation practices, voluntary, customer-driven. Matt is the NRCS National Planning Technology Lead in the agency's Conservation Planning and Technical Assistance Division, a 27-year NRCS veteran. Matt is currently working on projects to improve NRCS conservation planning workflow and streamline environmental compliance documentation. And Matt, I think it's your turn to shine, buddy. So there you go.
Great Q&A session. Thank you for the participants' questions, and Alana, good job fielding those. I think I'm going to get to address a couple that we were unable to cover. What I want to do is explore the payment schedules with you guys. There was some questions. Well, I was trying to show a live website, and Michael could click the link in there. Michael, I saw you click that link, and now you're at the payment schedules website. This is a public-facing website that will address some of the questions that participants asked. Each year, the economists who develop the payment schedules and adjust for the regional rates publish their work at around October, November, the first quarter of the federal fiscal year. This website is available for you to explore. We'll put the link in the slides, or maybe we can copy it and drop it in the chat. I'll drop it in the chat if you want to look at it, because as Michael rolls down here, you'll see there's an alphabetical listing of states. And Michael, if you go ahead and click on California EQIP, it's going to open a PDF file that's like 1,200 pages long. Oh, it's just 80? Oh, I know what this is. This is the scenarios. This is going to show, it's in numeric order by code. And we know that this fiscal year, practice code 808 is the critical one for soil carbon amendment. So Michael, if you can roll down to 808, what you see here is a list of, we call them scenarios, or they're what Ilana mentioned was payment schedule scenarios. Each one of the rows in here is for a typical scenario that's been modeled to establish the payment rate. And you'll notice that each row, the first row says 100% biochar. The second one, the row says HU 100% biochar. That HU is for the historically underserved. And that pattern repeats for every scenario name. There is a HU rate. And the point of including them both is to illustrate the payment rate is higher for the historically underserved customer. And that's why you'll see that pattern. So these are per cubic yard costs for agreements or payment rates. They're not costs, they're payment rates. It's basically the rate that the NRCS will reimburse the participant at on a per cubic yard basis. I guess the per cubic yard quantity is going to be determined by the extent needed and the intensity of treatment. I think Michael's presentation will be able to elaborate on that. Michael, if you could hit the back arrow one time, you could go to California scenarios, the last row on that table. This opens the very long 1,200 page PDF. This document may be of interest to you to see how the sausage is made. This is documentation for how the payment schedule rates were established. And Michael, in the upper right corner, if you type in that where it says page 140, type in 101036. And that'll take you to an 808 scenario. Maybe you can hit the plus sign up top to make it a little larger because it's a tiny font. Perfect. Michael, I mean, do you want to speak to this while we have it up? Or do you want me to walk through it?
Yeah, I can go ahead and walk through it, and I could fill in as necessary. Okay. Yep.
So this is this is how the sausage was made for one of the scenarios that we saw in the earlier table. The scenario that this one is, it has an ID number, number 25, but its name is 80% biochar, 20% compost. Below there is a scenario description and a before situation and an after situation, and it's kind of a hypothesis statement. If you read that, it says apply a blend of greater than 80 or greater than or equal to 80% biochar and less than or equal to 20% compost by volume to sequester carbon, reduce nitrogen losses, improve other soil health related resource concerns. Biochar, compost, and compost have been tested and is imported from an outside source. The blend contains at least 80% biochar and is applied at the recommended rate to treat the identified resource concerns. That is the hypothesis upon which this rate was built. That is not a specification for a site. This is only for cost or payment rate establishment. It's documenting the author's rationale for what were they thinking when they wrote this. I particularly mention that because it says the biochar and compost have been tested and are imported from an outside source. That is not a program policy. That is an assumption that the typical situation is somebody buying it from a vendor and bringing it into the farm. The before situation is an appropriate assessment tool, has been used to determine that soil health resource concerns exist. And I'll elaborate on what those are. I'll show you some examples. But that just means that Alana touched on this, that in order to provide the program payment, we have to document that there is a resource concern that we can move the needle towards better by using the soil carbon amendment conservation practice. And in the after situation, we've applied this blend at the recommended rate and ratio. The soil health resource concerns were treated. A follow-up assessment is planned to determine the effect of the biochar application. So perhaps some kind of testing to see what results produced. The units of measurement are cubic yards. The typical scenario size for this one is 4 cubic yards. Again, that's not a policy statement. That's documentation of what the authors were thinking when they priced this thing out. The total scenario cost for 4 acres of treatment is $924.21 on a per cubic yard basis. If you divide 924.21 by 4, you get 231.05 per cubic yard. The next part of this is the cost details. The cost details is the author's analysis of what was the equipment needed to do the application of this soil carbon amendment. So we see there was tillage and manure compost application, like the loading, hauling, and spreading. There was general labor, and there were materials. There's compost, and there's biochar. There's also mobilization of some of the materials. So those are the cost components. And when you add them together at their approved rates and the quantities that were anticipated to be needed for a 4 cubic yard treatment scenario, that's how the total cost and unit cost were derived. Probably more detailed than you wanted to know, but as producers or vendors or perhaps purchasers of this material or users of this conservation practice, it may be important to know about payment rates. And that website again is public facing. You can see the lists of scenarios and the rates they pay on a state by state and program by program basis, but you can also take a look behind the curtain to see how the rate was established. Michael, you want to add anything onto that?
Yeah, I would just add you did a great job, Matt, and that they are evaluated and updated annually. So at the start of the new fiscal year, which is October 1, you would see, as you notice, this is fiscal year 23 payment scenarios for California. The national will release fiscal year 24 payment scenarios at the start of FY24. So these numbers will change annually. based on real world costs.
Okay. We did have a
So-
couple of questions that came in. Would this be a good time to ask those?
You went on mute, Matt.
Yes, please. Let's take questions about payment
Okay.
schedules while we have this reference
Okay.
open.
Yeah. So Amy asks, what are the other carbon amendments that were in quotes in the payment schedule? Something said other carbon amendment. Was that referring to something like mulch, or was it a different code practice?
Yeah, there are various scenarios. There's up to 10 national scenarios, and each one has various mixes. We do have one for other carbon amendments, like mulch being one of them. The standard does identify a list of examples of other amendments, but there is one scenario that is focused on compost only without biochar. Another scenario with other amendments other than compost and biochar.
Okay. There is a follow-up question around compost and biochar. Somebody's saying that the state of Tennessee does not have biochar in, oh, whoops, I think I read that wrong. And I think they're saying that they don't have 808, Tennessee doesn't have 808 included as in their payment schedules. So how do we encourage NRCS or the state organizations to adopt it?
Michael's got a slide to cover that
Okay.
later, but the short answer is go ahead and ask for it. Say you want to apply for it. You know,
yeah,
like
I think
Ilana said,
encouragement
we
goes a
accept
long way.
applications. There you go. That's right.
Yeah. Okay. So here's a good question from Dustin. Is it true that the practice scenario you covered in that the rate shown is what the anticipated cost is, and that a producer would get reimbursed for up to 70% or 75% of that rate?
So the use of this, that's a really good question. Thank you. The producer or the participant in the program will get 75% of this, the unit cost that's shown on the screen.
Mm-hmm.
That is, 75% of the typical cost. Michael and I had talked about this, and we said, what, it's probably better to think of these payment rates like the coupons that your car dealer sends you to say, we'll give you $500 off service, right? But you don't know what that service is going to cost until you get the estimate. So what I would say is think about the payment rate as something that you can depend on as an amount of reimbursement. Talk to the vendors and providers of services and materials, get your quote, and then make a decision. Is this an acceptable share for you to pay the rest of? Sometimes it's going to work out where it's 75%, sometimes less, sometimes more. It can really be variable depending on the circumstances.
Yeah, so allow me two follow-up questions or scenarios kind of on this. So let's say that you live in an area where biochar is readily available, and it costs maybe $100 per cubic yard. Does that mean it will only cover $75 of that 100, or will it cover the full 100 and then pay me on top of it to get up to the whatever was the allowable 75% of unit cost?
It's simpler than that. The agency doesn't really concern itself with the individual participants' actual costs. We just agree up front that these rates were approved for use or payment in agreements across the state, so everybody gets the same rate for the same scenario. Did that answer the question?
So basically, per cubic yard, you get paid the same regardless of what your price of the biochar is.
Correct.
Effectively. Okay,
Yes.
That's real interesting. And there's no LCA on this program, only a suggestion to buy local. Okay. Let's see. Oh, transportation. of the material. Is that considered a cost?
I think it is in some regions. For example, I've worked with a little bit for the Pacific region of NRCS that works with Alaska and Hawaii, and there are adjustments made for those extraordinary transportation costs. But I don't know how widespread those kind of transportation adjustments appear for other regions of the country.
Okay, there's a question about this practice shows that we have the 4 yards per ton, and I'm guessing it seems like that maybe that was done because of the typical wet weight, with maybe with a biochar higher. So if and again, this code is all about the cubic yard, correct? It's not based on actual weight. So
yeah, they're doing it on volume, not weight.
okay, all right, that's good to know. Is there a dollar limit per acre, and where would we find that information? And what happens if the biochar producer can? Oh, again, okay, I answered the second part, but the first part: is there a limit per acre on the amount? So, because you have some studies, somebody might have a strategy where it's identified that they could really benefit from a significant boost and going more at a 10 ton per acre versus a 1 ton per acre application rate.
I'm not aware of limits, Michael. That might be related to the practice standard, or it might be something states develop technical or program guidance on.
Yeah, well, we don't specify any minimum amounts or any limits. It's based on the site evaluation and the material itself that is going to be applied, and what your objectives are.
Okay, and then also in regards to the biochar, so because biochar comes in a lot of different sizes, a lot of studies show that commonly 1 to 3 millimeters in size is a preferred size to optimize water holding capacity, nutrient distribution. But some providers have their bulk biochar is kind of in a larger dimension. Is there any guidance on the type of biochar that should be utilized within the code practice? So like anything related to bulk density, things like that, separate of the weight, the water weight?
Specifically in the standard itself, I mean, we do have parameters, but not specifically on the type of biochar itself. Not sure,
yeah, I think that answered it. So some NRCS states may not offer the practice for 336 and 808 for equip and CSP, right? So if this website, does that allow us to see the ones that have not enrolled in it? I think we have I think the reason I think we're seeing so many of these questions is because people are really interested in finding out a way if they can what is the best possible way to encourage their state to adopt the practice? It's like, should they be working with the soil health manager of the state? Should they only be working through NRCS? What's the best way to make it so this all meshes together?
Do you want to show that slide now, Michael? The one with the report of the state utilization?
Yeah, we could.
Is that coming up at Michael's?
We could probably continue, go back to the PowerPoint. Should we do that, Matt, and go through your planning process?
Yeah, because we're going to give you a more concrete way to get the answers about what states have offered this program opportunity. It would take a long time to hunt through this site.
Okay.
We're going to show you a shortcut to get that answer.
Okay. All right. Take notes, everybody. Remember, this will be recorded, and you'll be able to scroll back through it on the YouTube.
We'll share these slide decks somehow with participants if that's possible.
Yeah, we can distribute that. No problem. Thank you.
Yeah.
Yeah. So taking us back to where we were, This is a transition between topics. We've talked quite a bit about who the agency is, the program opportunities, and now it's time to shift into the conservation plan. And I like this diagram. I can't take credit for making this slide. I borrowed it from somebody. But what I like about this is it shows conservation plans are connected to program contracts and to implementation and to payments. And truth be told, it doesn't really matter where a person starts the process. They may begin the process by filing an application for a program opportunity that they learned about, or they may start the process by asking NRCS for a conservation plan. But in any case, the conservation plan is what I'm going to begin to talk about and relate this. I'm going to tie it back to programs near the end. Is the plan is going to be what determines when biochar is needed to treat a resource concern. Like Ilana summarized, that the program contract is going to deal with the eligibility, ranking for selection, it's competitive selection, and obligating a contract so the participant has an agreement that they can count on for the payments that were promised there. Then there's an implementation phase, which is kind of related to the technical part. The conservation plan is going to apply biochar according to a set of implementation requirements that NRCS or a technical service provider, somebody qualified, will provide that to the client. And they blend in the biochar and compost to the soil and verify the implementation meets the requirements, and they'll get the payment. I'm going to detail this process a little bit more. We're going to recycle this slide a couple times as we move through the process, but I won't talk about it so much. Go to the next one, please, Michael.
So, sorry, just a second. There we go.
So thank you. Go ahead and click advanced animation on this. NRCS has a conservation planning procedures that's often described as 9 steps, or more simply 3 phases. And that's what Michael's overlaying the 3 phase tiles on here. The 3 phases are simpler to understand. First is inventory evaluation. It's problem identification. What are the resource concerns that this client has? How do we help meet those? Decision support is an evaluation of alternatives to treatment alternatives, but also financial assistance alternatives. We can talk about programs to arrive at a decision. The decision, ultimately what becomes the conservation plan, is the client's decision. And then phase 3 is the application or implementation and evaluation of the practices getting put on the land. So let's look a little bit more closely at the inventory and evaluation phase, because some questions have come up from participants about what's a qualifying resource concern, or what resource concerns is biochar used to address. And we've got those in the next coming slides. Our technical assistance, sometimes we call it CTA, Conservation Technical Assistance. That's a funding that Congress provides the Department of Agriculture to sponsor NRCS, providing no-cost expert assistance to land users. If the producer chooses to go on towards implementing conservation practices based on our assistance, we can work with them to develop a conservation plan that records their decisions and gives them instructions on how to carry it out. They can also choose to apply for financial assistance, but usually this no-cost voluntary technical assistance, or CTA, is the gateway to a new client becoming involved with NRCS. Go on to the next. Click the animation. There you go. This phase of the planning process always happens locally. Normally, on-farm visits are made. The NRCS planner would make an appointment to join the land manager on their property and take a walk. There'll be an interview, an informal interview, a relationship's developed. We want to learn about the farmer's goals and objectives, and that can include profitability, land preservation, natural resource improvement, any kind of objective related to their enterprises, because that helps us develop alternatives that are appropriate for them to consider in the conservation planning process. As we walk the farm, the planner is looking for opportunities to help improve the condition of natural resources. What we're particularly looking for is what we call resource concerns. And a resource concern is simply a degradation of a natural resource, right? That there's some kind of a degradation perhaps to soil quality or water quality, air emissions, a plant pest problem, a livestock management forage problem, or inefficient energy use around the farm. Our goal is to bring back some solutions to the conversation that can lead to greater sustainability and maintain the long-term intended use, the long-term productive capability of the land resources. Typically, we use tools or tests or observations. And I want to illustrate some of those tools, tests, and observations that planners use during farm visits or even prior to farm visits sometimes to help identify resource concerns. If you go to the next slide, please. NRCS establishes a national framework for resource concerns and planning criteria. The concept is across the nation, there's a set of resource concerns that are designated, named, and described. And then there are planning criteria, which are targets we hang out for the planners to strive to assist their clients in meeting. So in the case of organic matter depletion, there's the problem or the resource concern name. It's a management-induced depletion of any or all pools of soil organic matter, resulting in limited soil function and processes that support plant productivity, biological activity, and water and nutrient cycling. The objective through conservation planning or technical assistance is maintain, increase, or improve soil organic matter. In this case, this little example we've clipped out, it's when it's on cropland or associated agriculture land, which is maybe think of the spaces outside of a center pivot irrigation circle that might be used for pasture. That can be an example of associated ag land. But anyhow, think about cropland foremost. There are tools to use. The tools is the national or state in-field soil health assessment worksheet, but also look at client input or planner observation. There's things we can notice by talking to the client. What do they have? What test results have they received? Dig a pit, look at the soil profile on the sharpshooter spade together. What do we see? Laboratory test results, or perhaps some kind of wind and water erosion technology that predicts a trend in organic matter accumulation or depletion. Then there's planning criteria on the right, which are targets that we want to meet. We want to implement systems that address the depletion or improve organic matter accumulation trends over time. So that's the framework. I think the next slide, if you go to that, will show some of the tools. Oh, sorry. This is the connections. The connections between soil carbon amendment practice and resource concerns. So in our framework, that document that I just showed you, this is a list of 7 resource concerns that are recognized being benefited by the soil carbon amendment practice: aggregate instability, compaction, concentration of salts or other chemicals in the soil, organic matter depletion, soil organism habitat loss or degradation, inefficient irrigation water use, plant productivity and health. I'm smiling as I read these because they sound a lot like the explanation of biochar that John gave at the beginning of this presentation. There's pretty good alignment between what he said and what NRCS recognizes as beneficial impacts of soil carbon amendment. So if you go forward, Michael, the methods planners use to identify and evaluate resource concerns vary depending on the circumstances. We mentioned client input and planner observation. I like the little picture here on the right, the sharpshooter spade pulling up a sample of the topsoil in a field that looks like it's covered with a diverse cover crop. There's something to be observed there, and maybe shared or communicated between the planner and the farmer. In-field soil health assessment worksheet is a tool we will show an example of. It's one of the technology tools that the Soil Health Division has led the development of. Then there's traditional soil tests, the laboratory methods tests for organic matter, soil health testing, soil erosion and tillage intensity models, and web soil survey interpretations, particularly interesting interpretations for biochar benefit impact. And we'll show you some of these coming up. If you switch to the next slide, here's that web spatial soil data interpretation from Web Soil Survey. So the source of this is Web Soil Survey. And I think John said that you're going to have speakers talk about this in more detail. I have an awareness level. When I look at that, I know right away what it's telling me. I see green. That is an interpretive map of a landscape over a photo base layer that says green sites are going to have a strong positive response to incorporation of biochar, but red sites are going to have an impaired response to biochar, probably not the best investment. This is a resource that a conservation planner might look at before making a farm visit with a client, particularly if they know they have an interest in soil carbon amendment practice. This helps have the conversation about where's the priorities to explore this new technology. It's a free USDA provided, NRCS provided website, Web Soil Survey. The link is embedded in the slide deck, and the soil health interpretation is named Dynamic Soil Properties Response to Biochar. Pretty cool. And I think you'll learn more about that tomorrow. In-field soil health assessment is the thing that I mentioned that I would show. These it is a kind of a clipboard-based guide for a field investigation that you can see some planners probably learning how to do this together at a training site where they dig a soil pit and they make observations of things like the soil cover, the residue integrity, surface crust, ponding or infiltration, penetration resistance, water stable aggregate soil structure, etc. And this is going to help identify limiting factors that need correction, and it leads to the identification of resource concerns. Go to the next one, Michael. There are soil health testing options. On the left is a EQIP program opportunity called Soil Health Testing, also known as CEMA 216. We say SEMA 216. This is an EQIP provided program opportunity for the participant to get the agreement and then hire a qualified individual like a certified crop advisor, a professional agronomist, or a technical service provider who's got certification for soil health management plans, etc. There's criteria. They hire this person to go out and develop a sampling plan, collect the samples, take them to the lab or ship them to the lab, and deliver the results back to the client. That's what this EQIP opportunity SEMA 216 is providing. But there are other technical tests described in a soil health technical note number 450-03 that describes appropriate lab procedures and indicators for soil health. Michael, do you want to add anything on to that about the soil health tech note?
Yeah, that is soon to be updated, but it is Yeah, it just provides the, I don't really have anything more to add. It provides just the guidance and uh, uh, goes more in depth as to the soil health indicators that the SEMA 216 is analyzing. The document on the left is a short document and just kind of lists the indicators of soil health. This document will expand on those indicators and talk about some of the laboratory procedures involved.
Good. All right, let's forge ahead. So we've moved in out of the inventory and evaluation phase 1 into phase 2, which is decision support. This is where now that we've identified problems in the field, the planner formulates solutions, proposed alternative solutions to address the client's objectives and the identified resource concerns. They're usually going to come back with a suite of conservation practices, but there might also be planning activities like that SEMA 216, or perhaps if this client has already applied conservation practice and they're ready to take it to the next level, maybe they're going to have CSP enhancements or bundles to talk about. But the point is, we're going to fundamentally provide a set of alternatives that are based on using conservation practices, which are either structural, like a terrace or a culvert, or a vegetative measure, something that's perennial vegetation or woody vegetation, or a management activity like nutrient management or no-till that's used to address a resource concern and the client's objectives. Our technical guidance for the conservation practice alternatives are based on conservation practice standards and practice specifications. Michael will detail how you get those more coming up, but it's very important that NRCS is a science-based technical assistance provider, and its practice standards and practice specifications is the sideboards for the technical assistance that we provide, whether it's inside a program opportunity or not. We come back to conservation practices. Our theme for today is soil carbon amendment. It's going to have two identities this year, both 808 and 336. They both bear the same name. 808 was an interim practice. 336 is what is going to be the permanent practice. They have the same name, but different identities by the code. This year for the payment schedules, you're going to find 808 is the one that EQIP financial assistance is available for. I don't think there is financial assistance available for 336. We'll talk about that some more later on. Go on to the next slide, please. So the alternatives development is going to be the expectation of a planner is they deliver options to the client that will address an identified resource concern, or one or more identified resource concerns. That's like the minimum planning standard. Move the needle to a better direction towards improvement of a resource condition. If there is a circumstance where soil carbon amendment practice is used, it's typically going to be included in a plan that combines that practice with a suite of other soil health practices like conservation crop rotation, cover crops, no-till, nutrient management, or mulching. It's going to depend on the site and the operational characteristics of the enterprise, but together they could form a system that provides the best performance and suitability for the site, and may also potentially all of them be financially assisted during implementation. But that's something we can explore as we go forward. Now, towards the end of this phase, the client and the planner will have met, they've walked the farm, they've identified resource concerns and objectives. The planner has formulated some alternatives and explained them to the client. They included some reflections on which of the practices selected might have financial assistance opportunities, because the bottom line is what really helps make decisions, right? And it's going to end up with a decision being made by the client. The client is the decision maker. This is voluntary, remember. The plan is a record of the customer's decision, and the key 3 ingredients that it's going to have is a table and maps indicating where conservation practices are used and their locations and timing. So there's a schedule involved here too. And in this slide, I tried to show an example practice schedule. If you look at that table in the center of the slide, near the center of it, it's got nutrient management, soil carbon amendment, cover crop, and residue management. Those are practices that work together well in a system. The concept here is that the planned amount, it was 12 acres of each. I don't know if that's actually the units that we use. This is a hypothetical, but I think it is acres for all of those. And then look at the planned dates. It follows a chronological order. In May, we're going to start managing nutrients to drive down excess nitrogen, perhaps, or scavenge phosphorus. We're going to apply the soil carbon amendment in September, maybe after the crop comes off, and then a cover crop immediately after incorporating the soil carbon amendment. Then follow that cover crop in April of the next year prior to the next planting with residue management no-till. It's just a hypothetical, but the idea is this is what a plan from NRCS looks like in a very general sense, accompanied by the map that shows where the treatment is being applied on the right. Go ahead, Michael. You've seen this slide before. We've got a conservation plan now. We've talked about program opportunities that are related to decisions made in the plan. So here's a program contract opportunity. Perhaps this person applies, gets ranked, receives an obligated contract, and gets notified that your contract is good to go. You can begin implementation. They do the implementation. Now let's talk about those last 2 parts, implementation and payment. Go to the next slide, please. We're down to this last phase 3, the implementation and evaluation. Go ahead to the next one. So after the specifications have been delivered by NRCS for how to do the practice to meet our standards, or maybe they were delivered by a technical service provider, but we typically provide what's called an implementation requirement. It could also be called a practice design, but they're synonymous. They're basically site-specific instructions for how to do the work and meet the practice standard for quality's sake and to ensure the results are what's expected. When the participant implements the work, they contact the local NRCS staff and ask them to verify the work is completed. This is an excellent use for that farmers.gov website that I mentioned early. Farmers.gov is a great way, I think it's one of the most popular uses of it, is to say work completed, ready for an inspection, and get the appointment scheduled. The participant makes the request for payment and receives payment, and this may answer questions that were asked. The last bullet on here is the payment amount is going to be equal to the payment schedule rate that was in the agreement times the amount that was actually implemented. Pretty simple formula. This is a good point to pause, John, and either take questions or take the break, because we'll shift to Michael next.
There are a lot of questions. We're going to have a really fun, I think, larger Q&A toward the end of the session. Let's do this. Let's do, a few minutes specific to your presentation, and then we'll plan on catching up on everybody else at the end. I'm gonna say that we're getting a lot of folks that are basically saying, my state is not doing it. How do I get them to participate? And again, we just need to remind you, you need to lobby. You've got to go and pitch yourself and your program and your soil carbon goals to your local NRCS office and the state organizations. So some folks were confused why the amendment chose to go by ton or volume instead of ton when compost is in tonnage. So if there's a quick explanation of that, maybe that would help.
Okay. I don't want to steal Michael's thunder. I want to let him
okay.
talk about the
Let's
how to get
just
the
go ahead. Let's go ahead and pass that. How does the farmer get paid if he adopts more than one BMP in his cropland? Examples such as biochar application plus cover crop. Does he get paid for both?
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, they could definitely be in that scenario that I had with all the rows for the different BMPs listed in the table. They could have contract line items for each one and payments
Okay.
corresponding.
Okay, and then related to the payments, typically the producer or the farmer pays up front, and then they get their reimbursement from.
That is typical. We pay in arrears after the work is done, but there are program allowances to request payment or a fraction of the payment ahead of time. If somebody's got hardship circumstance, they can't afford to front the money, they should ask for explanation of opportunity for
Okay.
prepayment.
In terms of funding, if the demand for service exceeds the annual funding allocation, do applications roll into the next fiscal year? And I think that brings up
Yes.
a good point. Like, what is the intent? Is there an anticipated amount of dollars that will be made available for the 808 and 336? I think that's pretty vague right now.
It's you know, I think, in my opinion, that is normally the kind of decision that's made on a state by state level. And it's an appropriate point to mention that the two influential decision makers in there is the state conservationist. The NRCS state conservationist is the executive director for the agency in a state. They have in every state a state technical advisory committee that gives recommendations to the state conservationist to consider for farm bill programs implementation and technical guidance. And that's a really good forum to do the kind of campaigning that your the audience is interested in with regard to adopting 808 and 336, or to designate a certain amount of funding to provide minimum assurances that funds will be available to do a certain amount in the state.
Okay. I think something that I want to point out, because it ties in with a relevant question about how as an organization, we want to let everybody know we've heard from a number of producers, the growers and ranchers that are trying to pursue this code, but their local NRCS office has not been very aware of it. I just want to reiterate, they've been hiring a tremendous number of staff. They are very dedicated to supporting all producers across their massive range of codes that they have to support. So it's not intentional. I also want to add that we have a tremendous number of USDA staff on today, as this program was distributed through their internal channels. So a lot of the folks in your local area may be getting the same quality education on the code and the practices you are today. So I think we can look forward to that, and then hopefully we see some of those IRA funds applied to your staff. I know you're drastically understaffed, so especially with as much money as you have to spend. So somebody is asking if EQIP will cover putting biochar back on the forest floor, or on more appropriate, maybe perhaps more appropriately to EQIP is on grazing land. Is it different than the cropland that was previously discussed?
Michael,
I can talk to that.
Yeah, feel free just to say Michael can take that later, or Michael, if you want to hop in now.
Yeah, I'll be talking about the applicable land uses, and there are some rangeland and pasture and crop and forest land and associated ag land. All those land uses are applicable for the amendment, and but there are restrictions and some caveats related to rangelands.
Okay, excellent. On the a question about the funds that are received, are these taxable? So when you apply and get and you're awarded funding for your 808 or 336, are they funded?
There is a 1099 generated by USDA that's sent. I don't know how it's taxed, but it's reported to the IRS.
Okay, that's excellent to know. Uh, so I know we talked about payment typically in arrears. Is there an estimate on about how long? We do have a number of questions about how long, especially for these smallholder farmers. Like, is it weeks or months or longer?
I don't know.
Okay. And I know you were talking about soil. I don't know if this is appropriate for you, but I found that our local extension and their usual soil testing option, they're not really familiar with biochar when it's in soil. Does NRCS work with extension to educate them on biochar, or is that something that would be more of a practice for the group like the US Biochar Initiative? Is there a pathway of communication so that way when somebody's dealing with their whole nutrient management program and application of biochar, the testing facility is aware of, so when they're making suggestions?
Yeah, I think extension are one of our key partners that we often work with. It definitely varies. The types of partners vary across the United States. And it would be beneficial for sure if NRCS provides information on some of the standards in general. So there's new soil carbon amendments that they are aware, and that's where we also depend on partners like yourself and other entities to help provide fact sheets and guidance on this type of information that's needed.
Okay. Yeah. There is an interesting question that came up, and I don't know if it's best for you or Matt. The term biochar, does it only relate to woody mass biochar, or can it be municipal, converted municipal solid waste? Could be animal manures. Is there guidance on that?
Yeah, within the standard in my presentation, I'll provide some guidance on that.
Excellent. And let's see. I think we're getting into some number of questions that are probably going to be more appropriately answered after yours. There was one larger installer. So, and then Matt, maybe this is for you. If somebody wanted to cover 300 acres of biochar in Illinois, what's it going to cost? Is that, again, is there a calculator that's going to help them figure that out?
We could look at the EQIP payment rates from the participant we received from that website that Michael helped us explore on to calculate what would EQIP pay, and then you probably want to compare that with the quotes for delivering that amount of material and incorporating it.
Okay, but that's something that they can effectively do on their own.
Yeah,
correct.
Yeah,
because
I think that's the nice thing about having access to the payment rates is you could do a little bit of the number crunching.
Yeah, I think that's excellent. And I think we're kind of close enough on the financial questions. So let's go ahead and I think this might be a really good time to go ahead and take a break because we're now almost 2 hours into the program. I think what we'll do, excuse me, Matt, I want to thank you so much. You were excellent. Really appreciate everything that you showed us. That was a lot of insight. Thanks again, Matt. This was session 3 of day 1 on the NRCS Code 336 Soil Carbon Amendment. We want to thank the entire NRCS Soil Health Division team for the deeply informative details on this practice. Next on session 4, Michael Margo will give an overview of conservation practice standards. Then he'll go deep into the Soil Carbon Amendment Conservation Practice Standards 808 and 336. Thank you to our sponsors, which make programs like this possible. Please contact USBI about sponsoring future programs. Enjoy this program, like and subscribe.